right, well, welcome back to Rad Futures. This is the second time that I'm talking with Alan Collinge, who is the founder of studentloanjustice.org. If you want to know more about Alan's bio, you can go to the description underneath the video or take a look at the introduction to our first meeting on Rad Futures, which would be the last video. So Alan, welcome back. Super excited to talk to you again.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, so I thought, with everything going on in Twitterverse and the media, I've been seeing an uptick recently in the discussion, I think generally around the student loan debt crisis problem. And so I wanted to touch on and revisit something that you mentioned the last time we spoke, which was about how the media is kind of manipulated, right, to fit the narrative that the lending institutions want out there. So can we maybe talk a little bit about that? I wanted to get deeper into it last time, and I think we just kind of lost track.
Yeah, I love that. If you look at all the news sources out there where people get their information about the student loan program, there's basically 5 sources. There's the Department of Education, there's Forbes magazine, there's, a laundry list, the Chronicle of Higher Education, I have to say, Inside Higher Ed, and a couple other places. All of those media sources are funded either entirely or in part by the student loan industry. So the days of sort of muckraking independent journalism seem to be on the wane in this country.
Yeah.
The simple truth about the student loan problem, it's the people out there are not getting the correct, accurate picture. So when you have people like Zach and Adam Minsky at Forbes magazine, who in their normal, their jobs are to make money from the student loan system. I think Adam's like a student loan debt coach or something, or a student loan lawyer. These are not unbiased sources of information. And when I first started this battle 17 almost years ago, it was sort of a different media landscape. There was some good journalism happening, like just curious reporters were looking at the data that I was looking at and simply reporting that truth. Mm-hmm. I don't see that happening anymore.
Yeah.
I'd say around the financial crisis, 2009 or so, 2008, things really changed. And
why do you think it was around that time?
Well, there was a financial crisis, but at the same time, there was a huge shakeout in media. Independent newspapers all over the country started being either sold or folded or bought up by larger conglomerates, the McClatchys and so forth. There's a huge consolidation. And what I noticed was that just good old-fashioned journalists were all of a sudden being either tanked out of the, pushed out of the industry, or quite frankly, they were becoming beholden to their corporate masters. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really sad, Jessica, the sorts of important truths that are out there. Just looking at nothing more than federal Department of Education data that simply are not reported. And I could probably talk for about 5 hours. I won't talk for that long. But I could talk for a long time about all the unreported truths out there on the student loan program that are just simply not reported.
Yeah.
Maybe, okay, I'll give you like 2 or 3 bullet points. So like right now, older people outnumber younger people with student loans. That's something that almost nobody knows.
And you don't hear about it ever.
You don't and you won't hear about it. there are more people over the age of 35 than under the age of 35 with student loans, and they owe 3 times more on average than the younger group. There are more people over the age of 50 than under the age of 25 with student loans.
So
And
I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a minute. So where are you getting that information from?
from the Department of Education.
Okay.
If you go to the Department of Education's reporting site, you can see for yourself, and anybody can do this. Any reporter out there can vet this information very easily, and they will find that indeed, I don't have the exact numbers, but I think it's like 8 million versus like 7.8 million over the age of 50 versus under the age of 25 borrowers. And the older group, the over 50 crowd, owes an average of like $41,000 or $2,000, whereas that younger crowd, the under 25, owes on average something like $17,000. And so it's just a massive disparity. That's just one of very many examples of the information paucity that is going on in the country. You know,
paucity. That's a good way to describe it. So there are more unreported truths. That's what you're calling them.
Massive. And we have not even scratched the surface. Like before the pandemic, only 35% of all student loan borrowers were even making payments at all. In other words, 65.4% of all federal student loan borrowers were not making payments on their student loans, like before the pandemic. Like, that's a pretty interesting tidbit, I would say. People probably would like to know about that. That seems to me to be a fairly important data point that is never reported.
Ever. Yeah. I mean, I don't hear about it.
No, and you won't. But if you go to the Department of Education, I don't have the exact link, but anybody can go to the Department of Education website and look at their data and find and confirm very quickly that is true. That's a pretty big data point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that really sort of changes the whole narrative about what we're talking about with this federal student loan program. It's a failed lending system. And if you were to believe the people at Forbes magazine, and I'm not going to say anything too bad about the Chronicle of Higher Education, they're not great, but any of the other standard mainstream media sources where people get their information, you would never know that. You would just, it's almost like a wet blanket is thrown over this whole issue.
Yeah.
An informational blanket, I guess.
An informational wet blanket. I would agree. I mean, it's so difficult. It's so difficult for me to pop on Twitter sometimes and see all of these elected representatives, who are towing the line without towing the line. They're kind of like towing the line, but making it seem like they're not towing the line because they'll pay heed to this popular movement by saying things like, well, we need to push for student loan debt forgiveness up to $10,000.
Yeah, that's talk about false narratives. I mean, how much time do we have? And I love Elizabeth Warren. I love Bernie Sanders. I love all these people on the left-hand side of our political discourse. I'm frankly thrilled and very appreciative that Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer put the issue of canceling student loans by executive order, is a very important distinction. Very happy that they put that concept on the table.
Yeah.
I like to claim a little bit of credit for that, by the way. Our group started the petition in March 2020 calling on President then Trump to cancel student loans by executive order. Mm-hmm. It's a very strong tool that the president and secretary of education have almost never used, but for limited circumstances. But the big but here is, what is this up to $50,000 nonsense? What is that? That's that
is a tool that they think will carry them through the midterm elections.
I hate to be a jaded, cynical person, but I think you're exactly right, Jessica. In fact, you have the quote that I would love to repeat many times. Every lawyer in the country knows exactly what this up to $50,000 semantics means. And there is I'm not sure, I'm not quoting you verbatim, but you said something to the effect that there is a world of hurt hiding between those two words, up to. That's lawyer talk. That is salesman. That's like a used car salesman talk. Up to $50,000 could mean anything.
Nothing. Yes.
And it could mean nothing. And if the people in Washington, D.C., particularly the lawyers at the Department of Education, if they have their way, up to $50,000 will mean almost nothing for almost everyone. And it will mean absolutely nothing for many.
Yep.
And so I don't get that whole thing. I don't know what Elizabeth Warren was thinking, who was whispering in her ear. The claim is that $50,000 would eliminate the student loan debt of 80% of all borrowers. And
okay, yeah, so let's talk about that, because they push that so hard. They push it so super hard. And it irritates me because literally everyone that I have talked to, so you're saying the Department of Education data is saying that the average amount owed is around 40,000? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
37,000 across 45 million borrowers. Yep.
So, which is hard for me to believe, but I
agree. I can't prove this, so I hate to say stuff that I can't prove, but I think that 80% claim is fake. I think that's false. Quite frankly, I have very good reason to believe that, for example, the Department of Education is not including interest that accrues on defaulted loans in the reporting of their portfolio.
Okay.
So that $1.7 trillion, I believe, I cannot prove, but I believe is low by hundreds of billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
I think the true federal loan portfolio on the books, including all the interest that is accrued on defaulted loans since the time of default, is way over $2 trillion. And so,
okay.
Yeah, I've done FOIAs, I've done many requests. I'm trying to get to the bottom of it, but we'll see if that even ever happens.
Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. I look forward to hearing what you find, because if that's the case, if the true number is well over 2 trillion, and like I've pointed out recently, and Misty Weiscarver, who I interviewed, has pointed out in her interview with me, you have this group of 45 million, people, but it's actually a lot more than that, because those 45 million people aren't just all single individuals, living their single life, living their single best life. For every one of those 45 million people, you have very likely a spouse, one or two possibly elderly parents that need to be cared for. You have possibly 2.5 to 3 children. So when you add all of that sort of stuff together and do the math, we're talking about well over 100 million people. In fact, I think it's a little bit more than that. And so really this crisis is, because we have these unreported truths, right? And the truth is kind of sitting somewhere in a magical sort of fog, right? It's being obfuscated by all of these industries and interests. Really, the crisis is a lot worse than I think what is being reported,
I think it's far worse. And it's even big. Even the top line, what the media does report, that's pretty big, right? Like 45 million borrowers.
Yeah.
under $1.7 trillion in federal student loan debt, another 140. Yeah, I mean, even on the face of it, it's a very large problem. But, you're exactly right, Jessica. It's not just the borrowers, it's their kids, it's their family. It's arguably their whole maybe network, maybe their most significant others and others. So we're talking about 80, 90, 100 million people who are, at least to some extent, losing sleep. And here's another very important fact, totally unreported almost. And this, the source on this is Wayne Johnson, who's a Republican, a Trump appointee who ran the federal lending program under President Trump. Before the pandemic, 80% of all borrowers, so that's like 38 or 9 million people, 80% of all borrowers were either unable to pay, and again, that's like 65%, or they were paying, but their loan balances were going up, not down, up. So we had 80%, 39 of the 45 million people on paper with federal student loans were underwater on their federal student loans. So these numbers, Jessica, they are cartoon-like. It's just, you have to really start asking the hard questions. Is this even a viable lending system? I don't think it is. Is this lending system even legitimate anymore? Well, no, it's not. I mean, this has been reported, but few people know. We now know that the class of 2004 has a default rate of 40+%, around 43%. So that's twice higher than the default rate for subprime home mortgages. Like the default rate for subprime home mortgages was 20%. We are now more than double that, but these are for 2004 people who were in college in 2004. So in 2004, people were only borrowing on average around like $12,000 or $13,000. And today, people are borrowing on average like $39,000 or $40,000 for undergrad.
That's why I don't understand these numbers, because they say the average is 40,000, but you look at these private schools and it's like one.
I don't get it. Yeah, I don't get that at all.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
We did a poll on our group, Student Loan Justice, on our Facebook group and also on our Twitter group. And I'm a scientist, okay? I follow the facts and I'm a reasonable guy. And I will admit that our group probably skews a little bit higher on average debt balance. I would imagine that's true. Maybe not hugely, but probably not insignificantly. But even still, 80% of the people on our group, when they were asked, said that a $50,000 write-off on their student loans would not eliminate their debt. Yeah. So something really is something's not right.
Something's not right. It doesn't make sense to me. Things just don't add up. They don't add up.
Things do not add up, no.
And I saw that, I think I sent to you or commented on Twitter to you, the Pew study that is now being dragged.
I don't know what that is. I haven't looked at the Pew study, but I can tell you that it's garbage. Mm-hmm. The Pew study says that people under 25 owe an average of like $17,000. It's crap. I don't know where Pew is getting their data from, but I'm sorry, it's crap. And we have seen a number of Washington, D.C. based think tanks put out some ridiculous, nonsensical data. And I have to say, I'm inclined to lump Pew into that cadre of Beltway. Washington, D.C. is an industry in and of itself. Like Washington, D.C. loves big government. I'm just going to say that. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. I'm a nonpartisan guy. But Washington, D.C., the people, all the different agencies, they really watch out for each other's back. So here, where the lending system so obviously failed, we're seeing some very interesting, how can I say this? We are seeing some previously unbiased, neutral, and respectable think tanks, for example, betray their loyalty to the swamp. I call it the swamp. People can call it whatever they want. Like the Brookings Institution, for example, for many years and decades, they enjoyed a very solid reputation as a unbiased caretaker of the facts or whatever, a very respectable, unbiased research group. Well, when the huge foundational cracks started appearing in the student loan program, all of a sudden we see people like Adam Looney at the Brookings Institute towing the swamp line, like doing what the department, like towing the Department of Education rhetoric. Suddenly we see like longtime professors from Georgetown University talking about how canceling student loans would benefit the wealthy. And that's just the biggest lie out there right now, by the way.
Yeah.
Canceling student loans will not benefit the wealthy. Number one, 100% of everybody who gets federal student loans, they are determined to be financially needy as a precondition for getting federal student loans.
Yeah.
So people like Adam Levinson, a long professor at Georgetown University, and many, many others, they are beating this drum about how canceling student loans will benefit the rich. And that is exactly not true. And
it's like fake news, really.
It's completely fake news.
Yeah.
So let's look at the big thing that our opposition is trotting out in the media is the fact that the top 20% of earners, and I don't know exactly what that income bracket is. I think it's like 150,000, whatever it is, household income. The top 20% own 30% of student loan debt. And they're like, oh no, we can't cancel student loans because all these rich people are going to get their loans forgiven. And I mean, let's look at, for example, PPP loans. For PPP loans, the top 20% of earners received 75% of all of those hundreds of billions of dollars in PPP loans.
Yep.
So the fact of the matter is that the bottom 80% of earners own the vast majority of student loan debt. So canceling student loan debt will benefit by large measures the unwealthy. And I don't know if you're like me, but it just makes blood shoot out of my eyes to hear these pundits from both the left and the right, apparently recently, trying to paint student loan borrowers as being these elitist, entitled, financially wealthy individuals. That's not the case. It's never been the case. And the people that are trotting out this nonsense ought to be ashamed of themselves. And I'm pointing to people like Adam Looney, who has very close ties, not only with the Brookings Institution, but quite frankly, the U.S. Treasury Department. I think there's a game going on in Washington, D.C. I think the Treasury Department loves this predatory, unconstitutional, nation-threatening lending scam. I think there's some bad people at the Treasury, and I hate to say that.
Yeah. So tell me, now that we're on that, tell me why you think that that's the case.
Well, the U.S. Treasury has been making a ton of money on the federal student loan program since 2004 and before. You know, it was reported by the Wall Street Journal back when journalism was a little better, or no, sorry, the Wall Street Journal. John Heckinger in January 2004 reported for the Wall Street Journal that the Treasury Department was actually getting back more money than it paid out on the federal student loan program in 2004. And that was back when, as a country, we only owed like a couple $100 billion. Today, over $100 billion in interest alone clicks off on the federal lending program. And the federal government has taken over the lending function. So they make the interest, where in 2004, they were not making interest.
Yeah.
They were only making money back on defaulted loans and a couple other ways. Today, since 2010, the federal government makes 90% of that interest, that 100 billion a year in interest. Mm-hmm. And since 2012, they've been at least booking $50 billion or more in profit on the federal student loan program. So, and again, I'm not going to go throwing around unbased claims, stuff that I can't prove. But what I just said, I can prove, and it's very common knowledge. But I somehow think that there is a very strong financial interest, not only by the Treasury, not only by the Department of Education, but a laundry list of inside secret handshake, Washington, D.C., financial institutions, and obviously the colleges are doing extraordinarily well out of this. But I think there is a cottage industry of people in Washington, D.C. running this or that or the other nonprofit or maybe other organizations who have a very strong financial interest in keeping this lending scam going.
Yeah. I can see that. It's kind of scary, actually, because it's like a hydra, with all the money.
You push it down in one area and it pops up in another area, and
yeah, and just with all the money circulating in politics, I mean, the way that they're paying all of these representatives to basically keep their mouths shut about it, or vote or not vote in certain ways.
Yeah, it's disgusting. It's almost what you don't hear from the politicians that's most important than what you do hear.
Absolutely.
It's what they decide not to talk about, which is probably the most damaging to the public interest that I have seen out there, at least on the student loan program.
Yeah, it's really, really something. What do you think? I mean, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, so we were kind of looking forward to some kind of measure of forgiveness, or the, what is it, S.2598? Is that what it is, bill? For the restoration of bankruptcy protections for loan borrowers. But I think it was yesterday, what happened? Something happened, and I saw it on Twitter, and they decided to, reinstate the pause. They're going to pause it again. They're going to pause the repayments again. And then this morning, I saw people asking on Twitter, well, do you think they're going to do this indefinitely? What do you think this means? And personally, this is just my own opinion, I wouldn't be surprised if the Biden administration pushes the pause all the way through
November.
Yep. And just kind of lets it ride. And maybe if they do anything significant, maybe it's right before 2024. Maybe.
The future is complete. Nobody knows. I don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know. James Kval does not know. Joe Biden has no clue. Secretary Cardona, nobody in Washington, D.C. has the first clue what is going to happen. This is the Wild West. We've never seen a lending system this hugely failed in the past.
Yeah.
Will they extend the thing past May 1st? I don't have a crystal ball. I think they're idiots if they don't, quite frankly. I think they're idiots if they don't simply get this lending program done. I mean, the most politically expedient, the cheapest, the most economically stimulative thing to do is to acknowledge that this was a massive mistake. You know, Virginia Fox, Congressman, North Carolina, said the other day, student loan cancellation or forgiveness is a terrible idea. Well, I have some news for Representative Fox. Student loans were a terrible idea, and the numbers don't lie. This lending system is not coming back. There's nothing that anybody in Washington, D.C. can do or say to make all the stuff that I said 5 or 10 minutes ago not true. This lending system is catastrophically failed. The loans will not be paid. The loans will be canceled. The only question is whether we get a clean, economically stimulative and sort of nation building, a cathartic demise to this lending program.
Yeah.
Whether we see a years-long, terrible, dystopian, economically terrible, probably civilly unrestful unwinding. And to me, it's a no-brainer. I mean, Joe Biden, on day one in office, he probably should have canceled all federally owned student loans. So right now, as you mentioned, we've got a very important bill. This is probably the most important thing I'll say today. As a practical matter, we are not going to see meaningful movement on student loans, cancellation or what have you, unless and until we get the threat of bankruptcy returned.
Yeah.
The foundational failing of the entire lending program is the removal of bankruptcy protections. So we've got a good bill in the Senate, S.2598. Dick Durbin has, I have good reason to believe that the bill will be pushed. The bill will be brought to the floor. The bill will be voted on full Senate. The bill will pass, knock on wood. This is the first thing that must happen if we are going to cajole any sort of meaningful loan cancellation from Washington, D.C. Because without the threat of bankruptcy, sort of lighting a fire under the Department of Education, we're going to see this up to $50,000 nonsense. And that's not even meaningful. So probably 85 or 90% of my group's energies is focused on getting S.2598 passed.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to file for bankruptcy. I get that. It's a terrible thing to have to do. Very few people should actually even have to file.
I was just looking at this paper that was published in 2016. Sorry, it was written in 2015. I believe it was published in 2016, called The Cost of Opportunity, Student Debt and Social Mobility, written by Daniela Crame. I believe that's how you say it. So it's all about how the language of the market permeates thinking about higher education, and people are turned into commodities because they're seen as human capital. And her sort of conclusion in the abstract, I have not read this paper, I'm reading the abstract. Unmanageable student loan debt and default threaten widespread social mobility, feed inequality, and jeopardize the economic recovery. By undermining widespread public support for institutions of higher education, the commodity frame weakens the larger institution of higher education itself, which is something that we do see, right? The article concludes with a call to reframe higher education so that legal and educational policy structures shore up widespread social mobility, revalue the production and preservation of knowledge, and strengthen communities. All of those things are really nice and great and democratic kind of principles, but at the end of the day, I'm a cynic, and I don't think that's what people really want in some, levels of our society. So I don't know.
Going back to our nation's founding, we had slavery. That is true. It was a terrible thing. We also had indentured servitude. That's maybe one of the most untalked about points of our nation's history that people don't understand. The majority of people coming to this new world back in the 1700s, even 1600s, they were steeped in debt. They didn't even let white people off the boats until they signed a term of indenture to a wealthy landowner or whatever was going on back in the day. Slavery is a real thing, and it's been with humankind since the days of ancient Greece. And I think those vestiges still permeate the world today. We like to think that we're enlightened and, we're the best country in the world and we have nuclear weapons and we overtook everything and stuff. And we're like the most, free society ever. But I'm here to tell you, there are a lot of very dark forces in this country who would conquer and enslave the citizens.
Yeah.
And that's still true today. It was true back in the 1700s. And it's a very real battle that we're fighting. It's not politically correct to speak out against it, apparently.
Right.
But probably the most unspoken, strongest muscle being used against the citizens of the United States today is the instrument of debt. And one has to look no further than the national books and see that student loan debt has increased very much quicker than every other form of debt in this country.
Mm-hmm.
For the past 20 or 30 years, certainly. I would say it probably has its foundings back in 1972 or 3 with the writing of what's called the Powell Memo, where people were really freaked out about what happened in the 60s, like all the demonstrations and the protests and the women's rights and the civil rights and other hippie type stuff that was going on. I think some very smart people did everything they could do to conquer and enslave this country in debt, and student loan debt is at the pinnacle of that fight. And there's no good reason for it. A free people are a strong people, and a people who are indebted to the government, nonetheless, are a liability. I don't think that we're a very strong country when 1 out of 5 of all of our adults are carrying this unconstitutional student loan debt.
Yeah.
And, it's great that we're even having this conversation, Jessica, because I'm telling you, 17 years ago, I would go on NPR, even like very left-leaning media organizations, and I would be savaged by the people calling into that shows, like Tom, I can't remember the name. Anyways, I would go on like Tom Ashbrook, I think was the show.
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
But I'm just saying, even 17 years ago, it was very hard to get a good discourse going with even the most liberal thinkers on NPR, 17 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's a very swift, clever, smart thing that the people in Washington, D.C. have managed to foist on the people.
Yeah.
And thank God. I mean, people are finally waking up to it now. The stuff I'm seeing on Twitter and Facebook and just man on the street comments that I'm seeing are like, okay. I think the jig is up and this scam is over. Thank God.
Yeah.
As I said, 65% of all borrowers were not paying on their student loans before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. That's going to go up to 80-90% when and if the Biden administration has the chutzpah to try and turn this lending system back on. It's a failed lending system. Nobody's going to pay. The loans will not be paid. And conservatives out there who like to wag their finger, and they, in their own minds, they think that everybody with student loans are a bunch of liberal, entitled, snowflakes. Mm-hmm. All that stuff, the reality on the ground is overtaking that nonsense.
Yeah.
55% of all student loan borrowers are either Republican or independent. You look at the worst hit states in the country on student loan debt, and we're not talking about, Massachusetts or, Washington State, where I am from. We're talking about states like Georgia, like Alabama, like Texas, like Florida, Ohio, North and South Carolina, Tennessee. We're not talking about these liberal blue states. We're talking about red states.
Yeah.
Indiana, Missouri, all of the states that I just mentioned. Student loan debt in those states now exceeds the entire state budget of those states. So we're just in silly season, Jeff. I mean, I don't even know what to tell you anymore. It's amazing to me how we've, as a country, managed to put this massive 800+ pound gorilla under the rug, or how we've managed to sweep this under the radar for so many years.
Oh, very clever maneuvering, as you said. I think the media is absolutely 100%. That's the first sort of tool in the toolbox, and also, they've bought the silence and the votes of specific sort of elected officials, which is or should be classified as obvious corruption.
Oh God, don't even get me started. You talk about some of our most vociferous critics are people like Virginia Fox, Ted Budd, Madison Cawthorn, some young kid in a wheelchair. I feel sorry for him for being in a wheelchair, but I'm telling you, he was a very bad person. Some of our most vile critics in, for example, the state of North Carolina, they are playing the political card. They're trying to paint student loan borrowers as being these snowflakes. And let's look at the state of North Carolina, shall we? The state budget of North Carolina is like $46 billion. That's a lot of money for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The people of North Carolina owe $58 billion in mostly federal student loan debt.
Mm-hmm.
So Virginia Fox and Madison Cawthorn, they like to wag their finger and paint us all as snowflakes, and we are not. But really what they are accomplishing is conquering and enslaving their own citizens in the worst, most pernicious federal student loan debt that has ever come that we've ever seen.
Can I add something really quickly, just because it came to my mind and I don't want to forget it? One of the things that somebody mentioned recently to me, and I hadn't really thought about it before, but I think they're right, is how does this debt, because we're talking about the tools in the toolbox, how have they managed to not only survive it this long, because it's been going on for so long, but even though it's on its kind of death throes, as you said, it still survives. How have they managed to do that? One of the ways also that I think they manipulate certain demographics is through the GI Bill. So you have the military, which needs bodies, obviously. I love the military. I have family members who've been in the military. We have Air Force and Marines in my family. Absolutely 100% down with the military. I think we need a military, and the military is great. The United States military is great. I'm a supporter, and I support the members of the military. So with that said, the military needs bodies. One of the ways that I think, the recruiters, and I know this because they tried to recruit me as well at one point back in the day. The recruiters go into certain neighborhoods, right? They go into areas that have very specific kind of demographics. They set up their offices in these neighborhoods for a reason, because they know that the people there want to do things like go to school, but they can't afford it. And maybe they don't want to take loans, right? So that's one of the selling points to get bodies into the military, is to say, well, if you do this and you sign on for 4 years and you go active or you do reservists, then you get the GI Bill, you don't have to pay for college, you can get a degree and do something even better, right? So it's a huge selling point, and it's something that, I mean, if we didn't have that, would they have been as successful as they have been in the last few decades, couple decades in particular, in getting people to sign up who are maybe, coming from areas that are extremely poor and stuff like that. So this plays into, our military, and how big, how large, how successful we are in staffing our military, and having the bodies to go overseas and having the bodies to do what we need to do here at home. So, I mean, there's just so many different aspects to this, but I think that's one that a lot of people don't talk about. It's not something that's, I think, typically publicly recognized as a driver. But that's one of the drivers. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, you raise a great point, and I'm with you. Believe it or not, the Navy actually paid for most of my graduate school. I was doing military research, transportation research, advanced transportation technology research at USC as a 26-year-old graduate student. I love the military. I have no problem with strong America. I think, we, like I said, we won the World War II. We discovered nuclear weapons. Maybe that was a very lucky thing. Whatever happened, God's grace, whatever it was that blessed our country with military strength, I think that's great. And at the same time, some of the worst hurt people on this whole student loan scam, I'm not kidding you. The worst hurt people on this student loan scam are veterans, and people don't realize that that's true, but it is absolutely true.
How is that true? Yeah, tell me.
The GI Bill is great, but the GI Bill only goes so far. And we have these terrible for-profit colleges who are just shamelessly, relentlessly marketing to veterans or active duty people to go to college. And so while the GI Bill is great, it doesn't go nearly as far as you might think it would. And I'm telling you, I mean, I can point you to hundreds, thousands of people who the worst mistake they ever did wasn't joining the military. That was probably the best thing they ever did. The worst mistake they ever made was going to college and taking out these student loans when their GI Bills ran out. So we have people like Linda Navarro. She's I'm not going to divulge too much personal information about her, but she's 70 years old. She borrowed, like, I want to say $30,000 back in the 80s and 90s. She's a career Army person. So flash forward 30, 40, maybe even 50 years now. I don't want to date Linda, but she has repaid like $100,000 on this $30,000 loan, and she still owes over $100,000.
That's criminal. That's criminal.
Loan. Exactly.
It's criminal.
I mean, what kind of a country are we where we take our best and brightest, our fighting men and women, and we wreck them? I mean, and it's not just veterans. This is an African American, you can point to any different intersectional, any cultural, this is an African American issue, okay? African Americans are hurt so badly by these loans. Mm-hmm. This is a veterans issue for the reasons I mentioned. This is a woman's issue. 2/3 of the debt are held by females.
Yeah.
This is a senior citizen issue. More people over 35, more people over 50 own student loans than under 25, under 35. Yeah. So there's a million different ways that you can slice and dice this demographic, if you want to call it that. I think it's kind of what you said, Jessica. It's the problem is so big that nobody has been able to get their arms around it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking just, I mean, the numbers are just astonishing.
It's a hydra. Yeah.
It's a hydra. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad that you're interested, by the way. I think your show and the discourse that I've seen you have with not only myself, but many others, so important. I hope everybody's watching this.
Yeah, I think it's important to, and anyone actually who's interested in sharing their story, get in touch with me at radfuturesnow. My email is radfuturesnow@gmail.com. Happy to interview you, happy to give you a platform so you can talk about your story. So just get in contact if that's the case. But it is like a hydra. And speaking of, these things, because I think, not that, like, as you said, not that doing any of those things to anyone is a good thing, but the fact that it's happening to veterans who've risked their lives, in some cases have lost limbs for their country, or maybe perhaps witnessed things overseas that have given them PTSD. They've been injured through some of their experiences, and for them to have to come back here and deal with an extra sort of level of
Suck.
Yeah. I mean, it's like,
I think most veterans are pretty sturdy individuals and stuff. And but even still, I mean, come on, what is this? What kind of country do we treat our men and women who served in this way? It's crazy.
Yeah. Okay. So there's the S.2598 bill that is coming up. And who is the elected official who's going to be pushing that one? Do you know?
Dick Durbin.
Dick Durbin. And then there are a couple other
Chairman
bills.
of the Judiciary. Yep.
So there's S.2598. And then what are the other two bills?
Well, there's one other bill that I'm concerned with is H.R.4907. And that is Representative Cohen out of Tennessee.
Okay.
And that's a private student loan bankruptcy bill. It's got way less chance, honestly. It doesn't really have a whole lot of wind under its sails at the time, at the moment.
Okay.
I'm still hopeful for it, but we're spending all of our time fighting for S.2598.
Okay. So just to revisit something that you said, because I think it's interesting. I think one of the most interesting things that we've talked about here today is the fact that all of these kind of demographics like intersect. So you have, the racial inequality issue. Then you have the women's sort of economic justice issue, which I think is a huge one. If what did you say? 2/3 of all?
2/3.
Yeah.
Of all student loan debt held by females. Yep.
It seems pretty obvious to me what needs to be done, right?
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, considering the fact that women couldn't own their own frickin' credit cards until 1974. So
oh my God, is that true?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
They needed, if you were a single woman, the bank could refuse you if they wanted to.
Wow.
And if you were married, you had to have the written permission of your spouse.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, we've come a long ways, at least. So
yeah. I just, and then there's the veterans, obviously, who are joining the military because they want to get out of certain areas and economic situations, so they're suffering.
And seniors.
I keep
mentioning seniors because I am now a senior, so I have to.
I'm glad.
AARP needs to be publishing our stuff. Like the two facts that I mentioned earlier, AARP has not reported that. We have reached out to AARP many times, and they have ignored us.
But, so you have all of these kind of mixed demographics coming together, and the one thing that unites them all is class, right? So, and I think, I don't mean to downplay any of those demographics whatsoever, because obviously they all deserve, their own sort of respect, and we need to work to get justice for each of those demographics. But we shouldn't allow ourselves to be divided, I think, because the one thing that unites us is class. So
I 100% agree. I love that this is a women's issue, the African-American issue, a seniors issue, a veterans issue. I love all that.
yeah.
But really, all that goes to show is that this is a beautiful issue for people to come together
Yes.
and stand shoulder to shoulder. If you're not a 10 millionaire, like even if you're a moderately wealthy person who doesn't get student loans, but has to write a check for your kids' tuition, even those people should be on our side. So we are the largest untethered voting bloc. We are the largest unaligned group of people politically and many other ways in the country.
Yeah.
So it's a massive strength.
So I just wanted to mention a couple more things before I let you go too. One of the other things I wanted to say was, to play devil's advocate really quick, right? So obviously we see a lot of comments coming from the conservative right. And I'm not even sure these are real people. Many of them seem like they're bots. But they always say something along the lines of, well, you were stupid because you didn't do your research when you found this school, and the school was too expensive, and why did you choose such an expensive school, and it's your fault because you chose an expensive school and you decided to keep going there, so the debt, you signed on the dotted line and now it's your responsibility, I shouldn't have to pay. Right? So they don't want to have to pay. And the narrative is that all the other taxpayers like themselves who are making six figures or whatever it is, that they're going to have to pick up the bill. Is that true?
No. Number one, the taxpayer, quote unquote taxpayer, has made a king's ransom on this lending scam over the past 20, 30 years. Number two, wagging your finger at the people being crushed by a big government college enriching lending scam is not conservative. Like all the conservatives out there who like to wag their finger and point the finger of personal responsibility at the people being wrecked by this, which is 80% of everyone, they need to take a couple steps back and look at who they are actually fighting for. Like most conservatives I know aren't huge fans of the colleges. Most conservatives I know aren't huge fans of big government. So these conservatives, they think they're conservatives. In their own mind, they think of student loan borrowers and they think of liberal snowflakes. And they are just egregiously misinformed. As I said, the states that are getting hurt by this thing are, it's not Massachusetts and all these liberal states. No. We're talking Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Missouri. We're talking red states who are being crushed by this. So the conservatives out there, they may hate college students, but this is not the problem. While they wag their fingers at us, they are actually being, whether they know it or not, used as tools for the worst big government college enriching, some would say socialistic lending scam in our nation's history. They ought to be ashamed of themselves.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think most people don't understand, that the more people you have indebted to this predatory system, because, if you know anything about it, you know that the interest keeps accruing and accruing and accruing, and it's very high. There's no limit, it doesn't have an expiration date like other loans. There are no protections. So anyways, most of the people who are suffering the most under this student loan debt, as I think we've said last time, or I've said it in other interviews, they end up having to rely on the state for benefits because they can't afford to buy food, or they can't afford to pay their electric bill. So they get on assistance. And, I feel like it's costing the taxpayers in that way. So if you don't want to pay extra money, I guess, you don't want your state to go broke because it keeps doling out all these benefits to people, then fix the fucking problem, right?
Exactly. You're exactly right. Like, look at Georgia. The state budget of Georgia is $48 billion. The people of Georgia owe 82 effing billion dollars in mostly federal student loan debt. Now, that is hurting the state of Georgia hugely. And I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, redneck, or snowflake. That's not good for the state. And maybe the most important thing I'll say, Jessica, is no matter what the finger waggers say or do or think or feel or emote or whatever, it's not going to change the fact that this lending system is done. The loans will not be paid. The loans will not be paid. The loans will be canceled.
Yeah.
Whether we do it the hard way or the easy way, that's really the only remaining question. So people need to inculcate that fact, quit wagging their finger at decent people being crushed by a very indecent lending program. And let's get this thing behind us and let's move forward as a country.
Let's move forward, and it boggles the mind when I try to understand why people don't think that social services are a good thing, or the social good, shouldn't be sort of focused on in voting or in elections or with taxpayer money. There's so many things that we could do as a society to help our neighbor, right? And those are very Christian principles. And we supposedly live in a country that is founded on those principles, which is ironic. Whatever happened to that, whatever happened to giving a shit about your neighbor,
I just think it's crazy that we live in supposedly the strongest, most successful, most powerful country in the history of humankind, and we somehow can't seem to manage to educate our citizens for a nominal cost. And
the thing, it's like, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. It pisses me off. And somebody tweeted today about, I think it was Denmark or something along those lines. I don't know where it was, but it was like the price of a hamburger, over there. And they stated the wage of the worker in this country, I think it was Denmark, the wage was like $22 an hour, right? And the price of the burger was like $4. And the worker gets paid medical leave, 6 weeks vacation every year, and then they contrasted that with the United States, where a burger is $5.50, and the worker giving you that burger is making $9 an hour, has no benefits whatsoever, and can't pay their healthcare bills if they get sick. So it's just like, it's crazy. Like, why wouldn't we want to have a good society? Why wouldn't we want all of our members of our society to be well taken care of? Why wouldn't we want that? Why wouldn't we want that? It doesn't make any sense.
I think it's some very dark forces have taken over this country.
Yeah.
The forces of greed, where in the 1950s, and I'm not saying 50s were a great time in our history, but a guy could get a job and feed his family, his entire family, 3 kids, whatever, buy a house and buy even a second house, and with one wage earner. Today, that's all completely gone. I don't know what the minimum wage in 1950 was, accounting for inflation and so on and so forth. But I would think that it's probably got to be at least double what it is today. I would imagine.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's so much I could say about this. So cool. Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I'll let you go. I don't know. Is there anything else you can think of that you want to say about anything coming up, or?
Oh, just S.2598. That's the only thing it's top of my mind right now. So
push it. Get a hold of Dick Durbin. Call your
and bankruptcy and loan cancellation are not opposing concepts. They are simpatico.
Yeah.
And anybody trying to pit the one against the other politically, it's just stupid. And they may even be on the dole. They may be even bad people taking money from dishonest places.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's my, yeah.
Okay. Call your representatives, let them know to get ready and vote for S.2598, 2598,
2598.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again, Alan. We'll check back in with you after some time passes, and hopefully something good will come of all of this.
Well, thank you, Jessica.
All right. Talk to you later.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 8 of Rad Futures with Alan Collinge. If you would like to contact your senators, your congresspeople in your own state, that would be great. Call them, email them, spam them, get a hold of them on Twitter. Tell them to vote for S.2598 to restore bankruptcy protections for the people of this country who own student loan debt. And share your story with them and why it's been oppressive to you, because I think they need to hear that. Follow me on Twitter at Rad Futures. You can go to my Patreon page, which is pretty much silent and filled with the sound of crickets these days, at Rad Futures on Patreon. And if you want to get a hold of me, or if you have a story to share, or you know someone who has a story to share about their student loan experience that is particularly extreme or interesting, get a hold of me. Send me an email, radfuturesnow@gmail.com. And if you are on the opposite side of the fence, if you are someone who thinks that student loan borrowers should not be forgiven, that they don't deserve protections, and you want to talk to me and make a case for that, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to do an interview. My email is radfuturesnow@gmail.com. Okay, thanks so much. Peace out.